Hello and welcome to the DC Lodge. I'm greeting you here from Crotona. And before introducing our speaker, Michele Sender, I invite you all to read loud the invocation of any Besant to strengthen the vibration. O hidden life, vibrant in every atom, O hidden light, shining in every creature, O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May all who feel themselves as one with thee know they're therefore one with every other. So thank you for joining us today. I am so excited to have Michele Sender here. So Michele has been a member of the Theosophical Society since 2006. She lived and worked at the national headquarters of the TS in America and is currently part of the community at Crotona Institute of Theosophy. She has a degree in education and has given lectures, classes, and seminars on theosophy and its practical application in daily life, both in the US and abroad. She's the founder of Fohat Productions, a publishing company created to share the living power of theosophy. So welcome, Michele. Thank you so much for being here. And please go ahead, share your screen, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
All right. So thank you for inviting me. And thank you for that nice introduction. I'm really excited to do this talk. I love preparing talks because it obviously gives you a chance to deep dive into the material. I've given this talk a couple times. The first time I gave this talk, it was all on quotes by HPB. And then the second time, what I did was I pulled in more of, I think there's some quotes from Subaru and Leadbeater and Annie Besant. So it's more of a rounded one. And like I said before, this presupposes that we have some background that I found that I just have in names. I had a superficial background in it. So like I said, hopefully this is a jumping off point for us to at least have an idea of what the Nirmanakayas are, and then the other little points that we can individually on our own dive deeper into. So, all right. Okay, so I'm going to start here with like before the Nirmanakayas or before liberation. In Annie Besant's book, In the Outer Court, the first few pages describe for us what is the evolutionary goal or the trek for the evolutionary goal for this stage of humanity, or what's also called the obligatory pilgrimage up the side of the mountain and into the temple. In other traditions, this goal might be called the union with God, unity with the one all, resting in the absolute, attaining liberation, and dissolving into eternal bliss. For most of humanity, there is no knowledge that they're on a mountain, that there is a path, that there is a goal. So what religions do for us is they give us a nice, well-worn path that has been tried and tested over time. And what Theosophy made aware for us is this particular path, the offshoot of the path, and then the mountaintop and what's available at the mountaintop for us. From this metaphor, we will see the climb is pretty straightforward, just like most of Theosophy is pretty straightforward and pretty uncomplicated in what is asked of us. Not easy by any means, but the golden stairs reminds us to climb with a constant eye to the ideal of human progression and perfection which the secret science depicts. And this is a good place for us to focus, okay, on that. All right, so Annie Besant describes for us, and just as a side note, I love these first few pages in The Outer Court. It feels to me like a wonderful bedtime story to put my mind on before I head off to sleep. So she tells us, I see a great mountain standing in space with a road that winds round the mountain, round and round until the summit is reached. And the turns on this road round the mountain are 7 in number. And on each turn, I see 7 stations where pilgrims stay for a while. And within these stations, they have to climb round and round. As we trace the road upwards along the spiral track, we see how it ends at the summit of the mountain that leads to a mighty temple. So here she gives us these beautiful poetic words, which kind of describe very simply the rounds and chains. And then she tells us that temple is the goal of the pilgrimage, and they who are in it have finished their course, finished it so far as the mountain is concerned, and remain there only for the help of those who are still climbing. Looking at the temple and the courts and the mountain road that winds below, we see this picture of human evolution and the track along which the race is treading and the temple that is its goal. So remember, the climb is only part of the journey, the part of the obligatory pilgrimage. It is the part of the path that is our training ground to become, to be on probation, to be a disciple. The temple is the ultimate goal of liberation. Annie Besant adds that there are briefer ways that wind not round the hill, but go straight up its side, paths that may be climbed if a traveler's heart be brave and if his limbs be strong. So this is what Theosophy gives us, is that like little hint that instead of traveling all the way around the mountain with the majority of humanity, there are spots where we can get off the beaten path and kind of trek for ourselves straight up the mountainside. And this is what I know Pablo mentioned. I heard one of his talks. He mentioned this is the accelerated path. So instead of taking all that time going around, Theosophy gives us the option or the teachings to accelerate our pilgrimage. So this is the basic idea of the path, using the metaphor of the mountain. Our talk today is about what happens after the temple is reached. So once the temple is reached and the trek up there is completed, Annie Besant tells us there opens before the liberated soul 2 paths, one being the entering into nirvana and the dissolution of the vehicles of the self. The other is the reaching of nirvana via a series of initiations and then renouncing it by the liberated soul or the adept. The path is one, disciple, yet in the end twofold, the open and the secret. The first one leadeth to the goal, the second to self-immolation. And so remember, the goal is raising our consciousness to the atmic plane, this moving from the center to the whole. The open path is the soul, when the soul has reached nirvana and has merged into it. And then the secret path is the path of self-sacrifice, the sacrifice being the renunciation of merging into nirvana. So Blavatsky calls this secret path the great sacrifice, because, as we see in the second part of this quote, the secret path leads to mental woe unspeakable, woe for the living dead, and helpless pity for the men of karmic sorrow. So we've all experienced looking at our family, our friends, our children, that we have mental woe for them because we can only help so much. So that's the sacrifice that the secret path leads to. T. Subaru makes a clear distinction for us between the two paths. This philosophy or theosophy recognized two paths, both having the same end, a glorified immortality. The one is the steady natural path of progress through moral effort and practice of virtues, the open path. The other road is the precipitous path of occultism through a series of initiations. Only a few specially organized and peculiar natures are fit for this secret path. So the open path, the steady natural path, or the path of religions set before us. The secret path of occultism is a specialized, compressed training that allows us to get to the top of the mountain quicker. So theosophy is no good for us per se if it's not practical, or if there aren't action items that we can take. So throughout the talk, I'll give a couple places that I see are action items that we can take ourselves in daily life. So this first one is, as theosophists, our daily training in this lifetime, lifetimes before and maybe lifetimes after, is to work towards purifying our nature and strengthening our constitution so that we are fit for the accelerated path to the top of the mountain. And here we can take our metaphor and expand it a little, that if we were physically going to climb a mountain, we would have to read about the terrain. We would have to get the proper equipment to do it. We would have to get ourselves ready physically. We would have to get ourselves ready mentally just to trek up to the top of the mountain. Now there's the cheater's path, that we could hire a helicopter to take us to the top of the mountain. Now the view's the same, but there is something about doing all that work to get there that ingrains something within our cells, our very cells, that keep that idea within us and that changes us or transforms us to our very core. Let me see here. So this is one of the points that I wanted to pause and see if there were any quick questions on the metaphor of the mountain or this open and secret paths. And if it has to do with something that I'm going to cover further in the talk, I may ask just a pause on that question if it's not a simple answer. So are there any questions?
Lee, go ahead. You can raise your hand or you can unmute yourself. So JD, but Lee, go ahead first.
Well, I was just wondering how one approaches the secret path. Is it something that the person does, or is he like chosen without making an effort to approach it, or how does that come about?
So this is one of the things that is called the effortless effort. I don't think anybody is chosen because of their birthright per se. It's more of the work that we do every day opens up the ability to be seen by the masters and then chosen for the path. So it's kind of like I don't know if it's a chicken and an egg thing, or if it's I do my part, and then through the grace I'm seen and I chose. So it's kind of like a choiceless choice. Does that make sense?
So if one is not chosen, then how does one go about initiating it? What efforts should be made?
Our efforts are not to be chosen. Our efforts or our goal is not to be chosen. Our goal is to do what's right in front of us. So are we in our meditations, are we working hard to do the meditations that will prepare our mind for those silent times? We're not just doing a meditation to feel good. Are we doing service? If everything we do is in service, no matter the outcome, I'm not looking for rewards when I help this person. I'm not looking for rewards when I do something that I don't get accolades for. So that's kind of a mindset, the intent. And then with our service, our meditation, and our study, am I studying it to gain knowledge so I can seem smarter when I talk to people? Or am I studying so that I can open up what's right in front of me? So those are the steps that we can take to be chosen. So it's not so much an entity says you are chosen, as much as if you do the work, the door will open in front of you.
Thank you so much. JD, go ahead. You raised your hand.
Yeah, it makes me think, do you think might be any relationship to the high places from the Bible? Over.
Did you say to the high places of the Bible?
Right.
Okay, yes. So the mountain is symbolic for that religious ascent to whatever religion you're talking about, union with God or to nirvana. So yes, it is a symbol for that.
Okay, that's it. That's it. Nobody
Okay.
else.
All right, thank you. We'll move on. So this slide will give us, it's pretty much, I could end after here because it's kind of the whole talk. But this will give us an overview of what we will talk about the rest of our time together. And I have some beautiful quotes that will just emphasize this short segment here. So in this planetary chain, the Earth chain, or this current Manvantara, our monads or divine sparks are animating as humans. In the previous Manvantara or the moon chain, our monads were animating in the animal kingdom. In the next planetary chain, which is not formed and not named, the monads will be animating as Dhyani Chohans. So this is the system for the evolutionary path or the evolutionary stage for most of humanity right now. It's the steady natural path of progress through moral effort and practice of virtues from kingdom to kingdom. Now, keep in mind, as we go along, our metaphor of the mountain is imperfect. It's just a basic idea from which we can go from there, go off or shoot off from there. So, all right, so what we're going to talk about now is in this current, whoops, one too many. All right, so in this current planetary chain, the Earth chain, when a soul gets to the end of human evolution, normally we think of reaching enlightenment, entering nirvana, and resting until the future Manvantara or unnamed planetary chain. This is when we said the monad will animate as Dhyani Chohans. What we see here is getting to the top of the mountain, going through the outer court, there's an inner court, and there's a temple. And doing that, the open path, we see here that the open path of the Dharmakaya, or vesture of bliss, is when all the vehicles of consciousness are relinquished and there is a merging into nirvana for this particular soul. So, Yeah, I have I want to tell you more, but hold on to those thoughts, even though Dharmakaya might be a new word. Hold on to those and they will all be explained in future slides. So the secret or the occult path, all right, we have the idea of superhumans or spiritualized human beings. They are a special sub-kingdom situated between the kingdoms of human beings and Dhyani Chohans. And here we have, after spending lives here in the earth chain, the soul eventually reaches the fifth initiation, the temple in our metaphor. These enlightened beings choose to renounce nirvana. One group are the Mahatmas, which we see retain all the bodies, and this will be important later on. And the other are the Nirmanakayas, who relinquish the lower vehicles of consciousness. So just a quick reminder that this group here are the exceptions to the normal evolutionary stage, to the accelerated path a soul may choose to take. So many will make it to the mountaintop, but they might rest in what's called the outer court. And then some may get from the outer court to the inner court. So not everybody reaches nirvana. All right, so we will begin this exploration into the Nirmanakayas starting now, and the Buddhist origins of the three kayas. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a common teaching that the Buddha had three kayas or three bodies, and that's where we will start as an introduction to the three bodies of the Buddha and their exoteric Buddhist translation. In general, these are the applications that if you were to use this in public outside of theosophy, the meanings, these are the meanings that are understood by most Buddhists today. So the Dharmakaya is known as the boundless, formless body of truth. So the Dharmakaya is the formless body. It is the Buddha nature, or the Tathagata Garbha, also known as in Christianity, the Christ essence. And this is the essence of the physical being. We all have this nature. The Buddha just realized it. The Sambhogakaya is the energy body of the Buddha. For example, when a Buddhist monk or nun has a vision of the Buddha in meditation, and this vision gives him or her teachings, they are receiving the teachings from the Sambhogakaya, or the energy body. This body of the Buddha and the teachings are from the inner planes. And in theosophy, we're familiar with this because it's similar to when HBB tells us that her masters taught her on the inner planes, in what theosophy calls the subtle bodies. So in exoteric Buddhism, the Sambhogakaya is the energy body of the Dharmakaya. So like a step down. Here, the Nirmanakaya is the Dharmakaya made flesh, the physical body of the Buddha. So, for example, when Gautama was alive as the Buddha, and the people heard his teachings and were talked to him or interacted with him, it was through this Nirmanakaya vesture, or a purified physical body. The term Nirmanakaya, was first introduced to us through the Voices of the Silence by Blavatsky. It was a sacred Buddhist text that she translated. So in the voice, she uses Nirmanakaya in this exoteric Buddhist sense as the purified body of the Buddha, an awakened being. Unfortunately, she tends to add some confusion where she, in some footnotes, she uses the word Nirmanakaya in the theosophical or esoteric sense of the term, and we will see how these two interpretations differ. Okay, so on this slide, Theosophy explains that the kayas, the bodies or the vehicles of consciousness of enlightened being, are made of matter from the higher planes of nature, that which is beyond the physical, beyond the astral, and beyond the lower monastic planes. So here, the Dharmakaya is the unmanifested higher or is beyond the unmanifested higher or spiritual planes that we're familiar with. So it's beyond the higher monastic, it's beyond the Buddhic, and it's beyond the Atmic planes. So here lies the unmanifested planes of Anupadaka and Adi. And so the Dharmakaya is the unmanifested monad or divine spark that rests on the Anupadaka plane. The Sambhogakaya is the manifested monad, and it's the relationship or the step down between the unmanifested monad and the fully manifested monad of the Nirmanakaya. So this is the manifested monad. Quickly, the monad is Atma, Buddhi, and higher manas in man. So this would be that manifested monad resting on the Atmic plane. So then, I apologize for the hesitation. I wanted to differentiate the aspects on the slide from the monad and the causal body, because we're going to talk here, we bring in the causal body. In Theosophy, the monad generally refers to the divine spark, and it, like I said, is comprised of the two higher principles, Atman and Buddhi. In the process of human evolution, it assimilates with the highest attributes of manas. The causal body then is the vehicle of higher manas. After death, when the physical, emotional, and mental bodies dissolve, the causal body absorbs these spiritual aspects of life and holds them over until the next incarnation. In other words, we change the outer garments, but we hold on these inner garments from life to life. We will see later that this causal body, our causal body stays from lifetime to lifetime. The causal body of the Nirmanakaya is of a different nature, as we'll see later on. And because of this, it will limit its interactions with humankind. Okay, here, those are just the quick definitions to distinguish between the words Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. The rest of the quotes will focus on the Nirmanakaya, but it's easiest to use it in reference to the Dharmakaya and the Mahatmas. So Leadbeater tells us here, written in The Masters and the Path, that when the human kingdom is traversed and man stands on the threshold of superhuman life as a liberated spirit, 7 paths open before him for choosing. We will focus on these 3. The other paths are in Leadbeater's book. So the liberated spirit, first, or one of the choices is that it may enter into the blissful omniscience and omnipotence of nirvana, with activities far beyond our knowledge, to become perchance in some future world an avatar or divine incarnation. This is sometimes called taking the Dharmakaya vesture. Or the liberated spirit may become part of the treasure house of spiritual forces on which the agents of the Logos draw for their work the taking of the Nirmanakaya vesture. Or the liberated spirit may remain a member of the occult hierarchy which rules and guards the world in which he has reached perfection, the Mahatmas. So to distinguish here, the Nirmanakayas are the generators of cosmic force, as it says here. They're part of the treasure house of spiritual forces, where the Mahatmas are the administrators of that force. And we'll see, because the Nirmanakaya drop the lower vehicles, they lose connection with humanity. Where the Mahatmas, they keep those lower vehicles so they can they're able to administrate these forces to humanity directly. All right, here we go. So for the rest of the talk, we'll be reading quotes that further describe the Nirmanakaya, that touch on their nature, their sacrifice, their work, and then finally the contribution that we can make to be part of this, to be co-workers in this process. Okay, the Dharmakaya. The Dharmakaya body is no body at all, but an ideal breath, a consciousness merged in the universal consciousness or soul devoid of every attribute. Once a Dharmakaya, the adept leaves behind every possible relation with or thought for this earth. HPB reminds us that the Dharmakayas are enlightened beings who merge their vehicles in nirvana. They are the dewdrop that has merged back into the ocean. And because of this, they no longer have contact with any of the 5 manifested planes: the physical, the astral, the mental, the Buddhic, and the Atmic. Because the Dharmakaya loses touch with humanity, this has been called sometimes in our writings or in our teachings as the path of error or the selfish path. What we didn't get to see in the previous slide was the other 4 options for paths for after reaching enlightenment. So part of this is we really don't know what happens beyond enlightenment after a being merges into nirvana. So it's called the selfish path, is not really absolute truthness, but it's relative from a theosophical point of view. Since our work in all we do in service, the Mahatmas and the Nirmanakaya staying in connection with humanity in some way makes their path a selfless path, and the Dharmakaya path a more selfish path. But once a soul reaches liberation and leaves behind all earth, there is other work that's going on. So I just want to distinguish that because I know that is a particular point when HPB brings that up. All right, Leadbeater, here's another offshoot. Leadbeater will mention here about the permanent atoms. From the Theosophical Glossary, we're told that the permanent atoms preserve within themselves as vibratory powers the results of all the experiences through which each of the bodies have passed, a repository of material aspects in vibratory forms. So there's a permanent atom on the higher subplane of every plane. So there's a permanent atom on the higher subplane of the physical, of the astral, of the mental, of the Buddhic, and of the Atmic. Between periods of incarnation, these permanent atoms are said to sleep in a state of pralaya. In our case, as human beings, at the moment of incarnation, these permanent atoms reawaken, and that's the thrill. They vibrate to attract around them material from that plane to create a new body. And this is where the regulation of karma comes into place. Okay, the enlightened being who takes the Dharmakaya robe retires into the monad on the Anupadic plane and drops even the nirvanic atoms. So the Dharmakaya drops the Dharmakaya drops the permanent atoms on every plane. Leadbeater explains here that dropping all the bodies and the vehicles, including the spiritual or atmic body, which contains the nirvanic atom, predisposes them to the impossibility of keeping contact with humanity. The Nirmanakaya retains the causal body. Oops. This is very touchy. Okay, the Nirmanakaya retains the causal body and also the permanent atoms, which are carried all through evolution, so that at any moment he can materialize round it mental, astral, and physical bodies if he so's desire. This definitely keeps the link with the world from which he comes. So this here is the idea that our monad as it comes down, each plane that it comes down to, it surrounds itself by material matter. And when it does, it loses its sensitivity. So the Nirmanakaya dropping those lower vehicles allows it to have more sensitivity, which allows it to have more potential power with its forces. So when we all have heard before, when the Mahatmas come down to earth, their ability to interact or their ability to enact their forces is decreased, and their work is done with more force on the higher planes.
Can I ask a question,
Yes.
Michele? I think there was a slide missed right before the last one, and it's the permanent atoms. Did you have a slide for that?
No, that
Oh,
was
okay.
just, yeah, that was just
It was
part
just
of
your
this
description.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought it flipped over it, and you
Okay.
said it was.
Nope,
Thank you very much.
it's a possibility.
This is excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so here I am, I believe. An enlightened being develops the Nirmanakaya in himself as he proceeds on the path. Having reached the goal and refused its fruition, he remains on earth as an adept. And when he dies, instead of going into nirvana, he remains in that glorious body he has woven for himself, invisible to uninitiated mankind, to watch over and protect it. So again, HBB tells us here that the Nirmanakaya reaches enlightenment, renounces nirvana, remains invisible, but watching over mankind. He does this in his glorious body, built of vibrations from his spiritual actions. This glorious body is specifically named. It's also called a transformational body or a purified body. I think I might have said before, the literal translation of nirmana is transformational, and kaya means body. What this means for the Nirmanakaya is the individual vehicle of consciousness is non-physical. This glorious body is transformed or an enlightened causal body. So here is a difference from us as humans. The causal body that we take from lifetime to lifetime is the same causal body. Remember that it is the vehicle of higher manas. It rests on the manasic plane, and it doesn't dissolve from incarnation and incarnation. But the Nirmanakaya takes this causal body and purifies it, transforms it, and uses it as kind of a causal body 2.0 for its work. The limited number of enlightened beings who are still working directly for us may be divided into two classes: those who retain physical bodies, the Mahatmas, and those who do not. The latter are frequently spoken of under the name of Nirmanakayas. And this is just a re-emphasis of the previous quotes, the delineation of the work, that the Mahatmas who get involved on the physical plane in physical matters, and the Nirmanakayas who work on the inner planes. Okay, their sacrifice. So Blavatsky tells us that our life is fulfilled when there is renunciation, when we live in service of others, sacrificing our lower nature for the greater good. And in this lifetime, here and now, we do this regularly. We do this when we renounce our personal comfort for the well-being of others. We do this when we move past our emotions, our likes and our dislike being our driving force in what we do and what we don't do. So as I read through the following quotes, and I will try my hardest to read slowly, I think, let me get this right. Okay. Think about right here and now, what we can do, or when our actions tend to move towards altruism, when we tend to do things that are like against our emotional plane, and move towards altruism or selfless actions. As we tread the occult path and its goal of a quickened ascent towards the mountaintop, we can be inspired by the examples of both the Nirmanakayas or the Mahatmas, or at least I should say, I am inspired by these quotes that tell us what they do and who they are. So an incessant conscious self-sacrifice through eons and ages till that day when the eyes of the blind mankind will open, and instead of the few, all will see the universal truth. These beings, both the Nirmanakayas and the Mahatmas, may well be regarded as gods. So the universal truth is a glimpse that we catch of the temple as we're making our trek around the mountain. Annie Besant talks about this much more poetically than I do, but she talks about the temple being this white marble, and as the sun shines on it, we catch glimpses as we pick our head up from our path and see that there is something more than what right is in front of us. As sacrifice is the natural part of theosophy, and we move in this one pointed direction of purifying and transcending our lower nature, I think this is the grace, this is the gift that we get. This is the beginning of the door that we're seeing, that by creating this discipline and making our vehicles of consciousness more and more receptive to the higher nature, we're able to bring our consciousness up to meet that of the spiritual forces that are out there. And that's the kind of choiceless choosing that is there, where by our effort, we're giving the strength to lift our head up and see that shining of the temple every now and then. So the Nirmanakaya has not the joy of the higher work or of the nirvanic levels. He has chosen to remain upon lower planes in order to help those who still suffer. It is quite true, to come back from the higher life into this world is like going down from the fresh air and glorious sunlight into a dark and evil smelling dungeon. But the one who does this to help someone out of the dungeon is not miserable and wretched while there, but full of joy of helping, notwithstanding the greatness of contrast and the terrible feeling of bondage and compression. So we see here that this is the great sacrifice of the Nirmanakaya and the Mahatma. In Buddhism, this is also called the Bodhisattva path. Compassionately withstanding the contrast between dwelling in nirvana and working for humanity. So our little action item here can be, as we study, as we meditate, as we move through our day with actions that are based on the idea of what we do in service of humanity. We gain strength, we gain endurance, that all our work naturally becomes full of love and compassion and accomplished with joy. And just as a side note, I think before this, if we're doing these actions and doing our meditation and our study, even if it's not full of love, full of joy, full of compassion, even if we are frustrated at times or irritated at times, that's causing us extra work, I think that's a progression to that path, that once we build up enough force, that grace is the love and the compassion and everything being accomplished in joy that we eventually feel, because we are creatures, we are emotional creatures right now. So here, to go on with the sacrifice, we have read of the splendid self-sacrifice of the Nirmanakayas, who, having won the right to untold ages of rest in bliss unspeakable, yet have chosen to remain within touch of earth in order that they may spend their time in the generation of incalculable streams of spiritual force, which are poured into a mighty reservoir, to be spent in helping on the evolution of their less developed fellows. The great hierarchy of adepts is entrusted with the dispensing of this force for the good of the great orphan humanity, and it is upon this that they and even their pupils under their direction draw when necessity arises. So remember that on the higher planes, the limitations of space and time is greatly reduced. So any work done there at that level has exponentially more potential than it is to do on the physical planes. These planes are the workplace of the Nirmanakayas. Remember before I had said they are the generators of cosmic force. So it would be very hard to be the generators of cosmic force on the more physical planes. And then the Mahatmas are just the administrators of this cosmic force that they use in order to help humanity. All right, so their work. Most of us believe in the Nirmanakayas, those great adepts of the past ages who, renouncing their right to nirvana, remain on the spheres of being as complete spiritual beings, save their corporeal visible envelope, which they leave behind. They remain as they were in order to help poor humanity as far as can be done without sinning against karmic law. So this quote explores the second half of a U-shaped paradigm of the obligatory pilgrimage of the soul. So in this example of the paradigm, the monad starts out unconscious but divine, descending down through matter and then ascending back to the spiritual, and ends up eventually on the same level, but now a fully conscious, complete spiritual human being. So this is the trek that the Nirmanakayas have made. So when we fully understand this, and then understand the doctrine of karma as a living teaching, we can appreciate and understand how both the Nirmanakaya and the Mahatma are only able to work within the karmic law. And it's the same for us. They can only aid humanity as far as this law will allow. We can only help our friends, our family, as far as karma allows. So we can do everything that we know, and even the right things, and it may seem to fall on unfertile ground, but we have to realize, we have to remember that karma is not a punisher, it's our teacher, and it's the teacher of everybody around us. So what the work of the Nirmanakaya provides for us is a bank, a storehouse of strength, wisdom, courage that may bring us support and guidance, or inspiration while we work through our karma, and while we, in our small ways, which may seem small, but are great to those that we help. So the guardian wall, or the wall of protection, is taught that the accumulated efforts of long generations of yogis, saints, and adepts, especially of the Nirmanakayas, have created, so to say, a wall of protection around mankind, which shields mankind invisibly from still worse evils. So this is the storehouse that we can draw from when needed in living life in service. So as an action item, can we begin to imagine what life would be like without this bit of protection? And then on the other hand, do we even fully understand where this evil or this misery or this sorrow comes from? Gladly, Leadbeater tells us. The Nirmanakayas are spoken of in the Voice of the Silence as forming a guardian wall which preserves the world from further and far greater misery and sorrow. For those who do not understand the inner meaning, this seems to imply that the misery and sorrow come to the world from outside, and that these great ones ward it off. But that is not so at all, for all the trouble in the world comes from those who suffer it. The duty of the Nirmanakaya is to supply a great store of spiritual force for the helping of humanity. So here Leadbeater clarifies the function or the effect of the guardian wall, or the wall of will, and the often misinterpreted source of our suffering. It is not the wall that protects us from outside. It is a repository of spiritual force that strengthens virtues, our spiritual nature, develops wisdom and courage, a repository that helps us in the self-created suffering of an unguarded mind. So our action item here is, as Theosophists, is to examine, to inquire, to observe daily, moment by moment, the workings of our mind. These practices can eventually bring order to the chaos, and with order comes a place of refuge, a sanctuary, a fertile ground from us to be more sensitive to the callings of our higher nature. So in her diagram of meditation, Blavatsky calls this place a substratum from which courage, and actually all other virtues, is a natural emanation. Okay, the Nirmanakaya have no material body as they have left it behind, but otherwise they remain with all their principles, even in non-physical life, in our sphere, and such can and do communicate with a few elected ones, only surely not with ordinary mediums. So the Nirmanakayas do not hang out on the astral plane talking to individuals through mediums or in visions. They do, but they do at times lend inspiration to individuals to guide them in their work. So this is where I just said the raising of our consciousness to the level where we can gain inspiration from the Nirmanakayas. So Jacob Boehme was a Christian theosophist born in the 16th century. And here in this quote, Blavatsky tells us that he was watched over and guided by the Nirmanakayas. Now, if we just think of him as a regular guy, a regular, really spiritual guy, we might say, okay, well, he was chosen. But this is where his work, his effort, raised his sensitivity up so that he could benefit from this inspiration. So he was a man of humble means, a shoemaker, but had a great mind. He is said to have both lived and died without fear. During a time when his life's work were judged heretical, and he was persecuted constantly by local clergy. HBB says of him that he was a natural clairvoyant of most wonderful powers. With no education or acquaintance with science, he wrote works which are now proved to be full of scientific truths. So I don't know. Yeah. So from a shoemaker, he wasn't part of the, the intellectual parties. So from a shoemaker, he and his effort, he was able to create great works that are used today. So this is the courage and inspiration that the forces from the Nirmanakaya, from the forces of the work from the Nirmanakaya. Okay, and Susan, I should say, I'm not paying attention to the chat.
Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it at the end.
Okay,
Okay.
very good, very good. So how are we doing on time? Oh, okay, so this is the last part. So our contribution, which like I said, I think is an important part, is if we follow the Hermetic axiom mentioned in the Bowen notes, as above, so below, we can see from their nature, sacrifice, and the work, the Nirmanakaya add as a repository of force from which we are able to draw courage, strength, and inspiration. We too can do the same on our level for our fellow human beings. With our work as Theosophists, we have the ability and the duty to add to a repository of force from which others can draw courage, can draw inspiration, can draw strength for the obstacles and the difficulties they face in their everyday life. Every time I come up against an obstacle that I fight at first and try to prevent, but eventually have to go through, I'm reminded that at times I'm doing this for those in humanity who don't have the strength, who don't have the courage, who don't have the means to do it. And by doing that, I'm adding just a tiny bit of energy of spiritual force that may help others through their difficulties. So it is the karma of the world that it shall have a certain amount of this uplifting force at its service. And even ordinary men who turn their wills into line with the divine will by directing their thought and feeling to the service of humanity, add a little to the reservoir and are thus privileged to share in the great sacrifice. On account of this, humanity is evolving as a unit, and the miracle of brotherhood enables everyone to make much more progress than would even remotely be possible if he's standing entirely by himself. All of this is part of the scheme of the Logos, who apparently has calculated upon our part in his plan. He is counting on everyone. So altruism is an act of doing for someone that which doesn't benefit ourselves. We do this with any selfless acts. When we do this, we're creating a container for a nucleus of universal brotherhood. So as an action item, again, let's notice in our life, where are we most naturally drawn to acts of altruism? And where do our kindness and compassion override our need for comfort or our need for control in a situation? Tiny though our efforts may be as compared with the splendid outpouring of force of the Nirmanakaya, we also can add our little drops to the great store of force in that reservoir. Every outpouring of affection or devotion produces a double result, one upon the being to whom it is sent, and another upon ourselves who sent it forth. But if the devotion or affection be utterly without the slightest thought of self, it brings in its train a third result also. So the first is anything we do that we do with kindness, that compassion, with altruism, creates drops into the reservoir of this wall of protection, or these forces that are used. So even if I do something and I'm frustrated by it or irritated because it's taking time, but I feel compelled to do it, it creates drops of forces. So if I do this outpouring of affection and devotion, The other way is with a more selfless act, it creates an effect, a closed loop. So the action goes out and it creates help to the person and then comes back to me and helps myself. But the third option or the third effect is an open action that actually fans out and up. And this is when our work is truly devoid of any hint of personal self. This energy exponentially grows and spreads outward. And this next quote tells us, ordinary affection or devotion, even of a high kind, moves in a closed curve, however large that curve may be, and the result of it comes back upon the sender. That's that second closed loop. But the devotion or affection of the truly unselfish man or woman moves in an open curve, and though some of its effects inevitably react upon the sender, the grandest and noblest part of its force ascends to the Logos himself. And the response, the magnificent response of benediction, which instantly pours forth from him, falls into the reservoir for the helping of mankind, so that it is within the power of every one of us, even the weakest and the poorest, to help the world in its most beautiful manner. So the Logos, or the God or the deity of the solar system, is able to take this force, this love, this devotion, this affection that is completely selfless, take it and exponentially make it work on the inner planes, so that when our behavior is able to ascend, we help the source, and the Logos is able to increase its effects. And I believe that is it. I have to apologize. I really was trying to slow down, but I just seem to work at a fast pace. I want to thank you again for letting me share this with you. And I always like to have at the end, because this was so much information and I feel like it stays out here until we're either able to take notes, which is concentrating thinking, or take a moment and I like to add, what is your takeaway? Since we're not able to share, I don't know how much time we have, but what was your takeaway? What can you take away from this? What's settled in within yourself, and what can you use today or tomorrow to help you along this spiritual path? So that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, Michele, thank you so much. Don't worry about the time. we go over time most of the time.
Okay.
You have a vast knowledge, but you are also able to link this very difficult material with practical approach. That's one of the messages in the chat. And I just want to open up the discussion in a moment after reading what's in the chat. So Paul, when you had the first session of questions, said that Martin Luther King said, the time is always right to do right. As I mentioned, Gwen said, excellent understanding of the practical application to these very difficult terms, beautifully presented.
Yes.
And Robert confirmed that. And let me see. Paul said, similarly, please see Hildegard from Bingen.
When she was talking about Jacob Boehm, just about being a polymath, but not having any traditional training, she was secluded for about 30 years of her life and only had just like one tutor, and she had mystical visions and created 77 works, and her music is amazing, and just all of her stuff, studying chakras. Just look at the pictures in the books give us, and I believe that is what she's talking about. She had very clear sight of chakras, and that she has 35 things to stay between, not to go too far this way or this way, and it's a very interesting person to look at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michele, so we can see you well, just stop sharing the screen.
Actually, I'm not sharing right now. Arnie is sharing.
Oh, Arnie, okay, thank you. Arnie, can you just stop sharing? And JD is the first one who had a question, so go ahead.
I do appreciate the presentation. This is all new to me. One of my takeaways that you were referring we should consider is from the Nirmanakayas, the concepts of the glorious body, the sacrifice, and the divine will be done. Sounds very similar to our Judeo-Christian faith as well. So obviously this could have been a major source for how we live and breathe today. So I want to thank you for the presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
And then Vlatka thanked you also in the chat. Well, I think, is there anybody who would like to share what they are taking with them? Arnie,
Yes,
go ahead.
thank you, Michele, for that talk on Nirmanakaya. Well, I also have come across a fourth kaya called Jnanakaya. Is that part of the three, or is it outside the three classification?
How is Yana spelled?
Jnayana.
So
It means
it's
wisdom, body of wisdom it's
right.
called. So I come across the
Right.
term too. I'm just wondering whether it's part of the three classifications you made or something else.
Right. So since Kaya means, no, it's not part of the three. It's not part of the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, or the Nirmanakaya, but using Jnana as wisdom obtained in meditation, or not wisdom obtained through the senses. I imagine that could be another delineation, another drop down, if you would say.
And to answer your question, what is the takeaway? I would say the path of altruism is being insisted by your discourse today, in whatever way we can, either through your meditation, through your healing meditation, or through your physical, financial, emotional help to others, wherever you can during the day. I think this would be the kind of message I would get from your talk, a kind of inspiration.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I have first Robert, and then Gwen raised her hand, but Robert, you unmuted first. Go ahead.
Great presentation, practical. You make this stuff seem easy to understand when it's difficult subjects, as Gwen had said. One of the takeaways I had is there's a lot of sacrifice going on here, but I'm wondering that we all do this, and I don't think we're looking at it as sacrifice. This is just the nature of our beings. This is who we are. And so as you proceed along the centuries and millions of years, and eventually this is who you are, who you were groomed to be. And so you're not making a sacrifice. This is what you want to do. This is what you feel is the right thing to do. You know it. You can feel it. So even though we call it a sacrifice, I guess that's one way to look at it, but I don't see it that way as much. That was my takeaway.
Right. And that's why I added a lot of things I do. I feel compelled. I'm sure that's a lot of us feel compelled to do it by some means. Yeah.
Okay, Gwen, go ahead.
Great, Michele, you did a great job.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a very specific question. It may sound kind of goofy, but let's take Jakob Burma, for example. When you talked originally, you're talking about this interchange from the causal plane. I'm trying to get in my head how the causal plane communicates in the electromagnetic field, for instance, with the astral plane. And when Jakob Burma was being presented with the materials and the energy and the information that he had, how did he maintain that communication between those planes, do you think? I mean, I don't know that that's answerable, but you know.
Right, right. So the causal body sits on the higher monastic plane. And you're right, that's been the problem there. How do you connect the spiritual to the physical? So there's always a bridge, there's always a relationship. So even if when we talked about the Dharmakaya and the Nirmanakaya, the Dharmakaya is spiritual in the exoteric Buddha sense, the Dharmakaya is spiritual and the Nirmanakaya is physical, that Sambhogakaya is the bridge, or the Antakarana, as we know. So in regular, not knowing how Jacob Burme did it, when we purify our nature, when we purify our physical bodies, we're working on the subplanes. We're raising up on the subplanes, and those subplanes are what's able to be in touch with the next higher plane. So so I would say the Nirmanakayas themselves, they don't have the ability to, unless they do it no. All right, let me back up. So the Nirmanakayas stay above the higher monastic plane. That's where all their work is done. So Jacob Burme had to raise his consciousness high enough so that it would touch the lower portion of the higher monastic plane. Then that's the way that he could do it. So I imagine, and I imagine, even though he had like a mundane life as a shoemaker, that never means what our spiritual nature is. Those are never a correlation. So he was able to, through his practice, through lifetimes before that, come forward, work out whatever physical karma that he had to work out. And at the same time, he was, graced with this ability to raise his consciousness to be in touch with the Nirmanakaya.
That is beautiful. And I'm going to add something. How do you associate what you just said to the mountain? To the trek?
Right. So I don't think that for me in this lifetime, with the karmic limitations that I have any ability to anything that is offered at the mountaintop. I'm still on my trek up the mountain. So I may get glimpses of the temple. So I may get that inspiration to work through a difficult piece in my life, or I may find some courage to work through, or I may get an insight. And all that's just because I work every day, just like we all do. We work every day, so we get those insights. So I would say that the outer court, that's when we reach the mountaintop, that outer court is probation. So yeah, that's what I would say. That's what comes from that outer court is, or when we're able to, it's hard to, because the mountain is like a physical metaphor and we're talking about a spiritual metaphor. So yeah, I would say it's some inspiration, some glance that are from our metaphor, some physical glance that we get is translated into an inspiration or an insight.
Well, you're my Sherpa.
Okay, all right.
Well, thank you so much for the questions. I want to add that Vlatka said that, thank you so much, Michele. This was wonderful, especially the reminder that our efforts are never in vain. And Paul said, I cannot thank you enough, Michele. Adrienne raised her hand.
I enjoyed your talk, and this is a minor point, and I just put it off in my notes as you were speaking. You were talking about the different levels of consciousness. Do you remember when you said, and hopefully I got you correct, that you thought that distinction, the individual distinction was as a result of different gradations of matter? And it's been long thought that matter is a principle of individuation. We can see this, for example, in Thomas Aquinas and earlier thinkers. And I may have gotten you wrong, but I am, in my work, have been trying to think that it's not matter per se, even higher types of matter. So I was wondering, can you give us a little thinking? Are you restrained to thinking that it's matter, or are you often also think that it could be something else, more something else?
So the way I understand it, there are three aspects we have. We have a spiritual aspect, an energy aspect, and a matter aspect. So in our highest aspect, spirit, matter, and energy are as one. And this is how I see the sevenfold nature coming out. So then from there, you have the next two levels, let's say, where spirit is the highest component, and then energy and matter, and then spirit, matter, and energy. And it works its way down to the next two levels where energy is the higher component. And these would be, so those two would be the higher spiritual planes, the Buddhic and the Atmic plane and higher manas. And then we come down to the energy planes, let's say. So that would be lower manas and the emotional or the astral plane, where energy is the dominant component. We have spirit and matter, say, on the lower monastic plane. And then on the astral plane, we have energy, spirit, and then matter is the heaviest. Then down below we have matter is the most component. Then we have spiritual and energy, and then our physical body is mostly matter but comprised of energy and spirit. So it's a gradation. That's what I mean by a gradation. So on the higher planes, it's spiritualized matter. On the lower planes, it's materialized spirit. That's
so we have spirit differentiating itself somehow in this manifold way.
Outside of the unity, outside of the universality, then we do. At least that's how I understand it in the Theosophical teachings. So I'm happy to continue this conversation with you, but I don't want to hold everyone up since it's not directly related to the Nirmanakayas. But I just want to thank you again. Thank you for allowing me to do this. I definitely got, I want to say, more out of it than you did, but I definitely got a lot out of it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead. Sue.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was chiming in how good it was, how you have us all just wrapped, just our attention is just there, very clear, understandable, well presented, wonderful slides, et cetera, wonderful. Sorry to interrupt. Over.
No.
Just a last note, Pablo added in the chat the gradations. So you can see that it's I think Annie Besson it's what Annie Besson says, that how we get 7 from 1. So sorry. Okay, now I'm done.
No, that's excellent. And very good question, Adrian. I just would like to add something about Jakob Böhme. Jakob Böhme had these illuminations, and when he had these moments, he understood the universe, and that's how he was able to write about everything. And he talks, I think in Aurora, the Morgenröte, he talks about this experience. Michele, I'm watching to see if anybody else raises their hand or is unmuted. I want to thank you. Gwen and Sue said everything. I am so glad you came here. So glad you shared your knowledge, because your knowledge is vast, and it was so clear and helpful, and reminding us to stay on the path. Nothing is in vain, and that everything we do that is proper, that could the good thing helps us. I was wondering if you would like to say something about Fohat Productions and the release of the latest book. You have time
Thank you.
now.
All right, thank you for the reminder. Yes, so we have, and I have it. We have just received a shipment of the paperbacks of Pablo's next book, Approaching the Secret Doctrine. It's teachings and practical application. So you can pre-order it because the 1,000 books are still sitting all wrapped up and we have to unwrap them, put them away and get them mailed. So I'm hoping to have those out by mid-February, but you can go to fohatproductions.com and there should be, if I've done it right, the website should be pretty intuitional on how to get the book. So thank you, Susanna. Thank you.
Okay, and if there is nobody else, and I'm going to send this table that Pablo put into the chat with the recording, so you have that. It has to do with spirit, energy, and matter. And when it comes to our lodge, we have a face-to-face meeting next week, so we won't meet via Zoom until the 18th of February, and I hope you will join us again. That is the first day of our 6-week series about the introduction to the Mahatma letters, a little experiment we are doing at our lodge, and I hope you can join us. And with that, thank you and goodbye, everyone. I don't
All
let
right.
me see if
All
there's
right.
one more thing in the chat. Okay. Okay.
I'll have to keep you posted on when I know we're doing a talk in Indralaya that I think is on the book. The Texas Federation, I don't think that is. So Indralaya is in August. So I'm trying to have something on the website that has that. And Susanna, what I'll do is I have a pretty table that has the 7 into one that I'll send you that you can send along.
Yes, I remember that from your talk. That would be excellent. If you can send me that, I will put this together with the recording.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, Albert, did you want to say, I saw you unmuted your phone. Did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Talk a little bit louder, Albert. Try it one more time.
A high level of consciousness was on Kindle. So I'm asking, will this new book also appear on Kindle?
Oh, about the new book. Can you do, I don't know if you exactly understood the question, Michele.
This book?
I did not understand the question.
I think he's wondering if it's on Kindle, is what I believe is what he said.
Oh.
Okay, thank you. No, not yet. That will be a little bit from now. It will be on Kindle and eventually it will be sold internationally as soon as I can get everything uploaded. So yeah, we have abilities to sell in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and India.
Awesome. Excellent. This is it. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining. Thank you again, Michele. It was awesome.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.